if an issue such as what's being brought up in the Affordable Care Act is not ripe, which means it hasn't even taken effect yet, that the court can just reject it right out. And in this matter, the Affordable Care Act really doesn't take place until 2014. So there may not be any actual injury, so people may not have standing to even bring these challenges. And so under the Anti-Injunction Act, that is the first decision they have to make before they can get to more of the effective meat that is being decided at the lower district courts.
Yeah, so there is a problem. Case in controversy, there's a problem whether someone's, suffering an immediate harm.
Immediate harm.
Yeah. Immediate harm. And so they're saying, well, this won't take place for a while. Now they had a plaintiff, as my understanding, they had a lady who said they were, suffering some immediate harm. Now she kind of lost her position for some reason on that. So that took kind of a hit. So that is a problem for the people who are against ObamaCare. That's a huge
in fact,
problem.
the Anti-Injunction Act could stop this whole hearing at the Supreme Court, so they don't even have to get to the merits of the appeal. They could stop the whole appeal itself based on that.
Well, I don't think that'll happen. I mean, just an approximation, because there's so much money involved and so many people, so many states, so many
26 states.
But also there's so many states having to make decisions on how they're going to fund things based on this incoming law, that budgeting process are already being affected.
Well,
but I would say the people attacking Obamacare did suffer some hits in this area, because some of the people that they were going to be as their kind of standard bearers
have gone by the wayside.
Yeah, have gone by the wayside.
Well, listen, okay, step two that the Supreme Court, if they get over the Anti-Injunction Act and they state that, okay, fine, it is ripe, we need to make a decision on it. The next is the individual mandate. And under the individual mandate, each of the citizens in this country are being ordered to purchase health insurance. And part of their purchase of the health insurance will fund the Affordable Care Act. So it becomes a material term in the Affordable Care Act.
Well, that is, a huge thing, because the Congress didn't call this a tax. They didn't say this is a taxing authority for this, as far as collecting money for this. They were quite clear there wasn't a tax. Now, the reason they didn't call it a tax, because they just didn't have the votes for it. It wouldn't have passed.
Yeah, so they're calling it a penalty now.
So they call it, okay, if you don't buy insurance, you have a penalty, so that's not a tax. And the IRS is collecting it, but it's still a penalty. Now, when they brought this up in the lower courts and the district courts, right, they said, well, wait a minute, now it's a tax. And the judges.
Well, the 11th district said that was
just ridiculous.
Yeah, it was totally ridiculous, because the entire legislative record shows that they were arguing it wasn't a tax.
And so they tried to change the story, but they kind of got slapped down with that. Now, I don't know if they're going to try that before the Supreme Court, but they got slapped down pretty hard on that one.
Okay, well, let's move on to the third point the Supreme Court's going to rule on, is if the mandate is ruled unconstitutional, will that invalidate the entire Affordable Care Act, or will it leave it, or will it be portionable?
Well, that's the question. There is no integration clause, and that was another thing of the Massachusetts senator getting elected. And so they had to use this emergency nuclear option and pass it as a budgetary problem,
so they effectively left out what is the most crucial.
Well, they didn't have the votes for it. They thought they were going to get another bite of the apple. They didn't get another bite because they lost that election.
Right.
And so they had to pass it without an integration clause, and that is a severe
flaw. That could be a death knell for the entire act.
But let's go back to the individual mandate and how they justify it. They're justifying because it's not a tax. They got kind of laughed out of court on that one. I don't know if they'll try that again. But they said, well, it's under the Commerce Clause. And their argument being that everybody gets medical care. Now, if you look back in the past into the 80s, there was actually a law passed that if you go to a hospital, you can't be refused care.
Right.
And so in that way, they've got a point that the society bears the burden of health care for anybody who walks into a hospital.
Right.
So what they're saying is that this is different than other commodities.
Right.
Because you can go in and get it, and society has to bear the burden. So this is different than all other commodities. This isn't like growing wheat and affecting the wheat market. This isn't like growing pot in interstate commerce.
Okay, I think what we got to do, Mark, is we got to hold it at that. But there's one more area we'll talk about during our next show. But
how about Medicare, the 10th Amendment?
Well, we're not. We're gonna hit that because that deserves a whole segment on its own. But I'd like to move over to Secretary Chu.
Okay, well, Chu gets chewed out by Congress, and he ends up taking the heat for the Solyndra debacle and collapse.
Well, why don't you refresh our memory? What are we talking about with Solyndra?
Well, Solyndra, it was solar panels, very popular politically. Everyone had great hopes for Solyndra, but it turned out that it just wasn't economically feasible in a capitalist system. It just didn't pan out.
Well, I understand. That's what's is funny about this. The Chinese are able to manufacture solar panels that are substantially better for a third of the price, and Secretary Chu thought it would be a nice way to even the playing field by advancing Solyndra $500 million so that they could even the playing field and compete with the Chinese.
Yeah, the problem with that is that when you give money to Solyndra, what about, because I was looking up, and there's at least 24 or 25 major solar panel manufacturers in the United States. Isn't that an equal protection clause violation against those manufacturers? Why is one person getting $500 million while those guys are going out and trying to get venture capital and angel funding, but these guys are getting $500 million? So for the government to give that benefit to one solar panel manufacturer and not give it to the others, why do you think that Solyndra got that funding?
Well, let's go back to what Secretary Chu said under his questioning at the Congress.
Grilling.
It was a grilling. He took full responsibility, though.
Well,
he said, I'm sorry, but this was a good company.
He showed some guts there.
And he also pushed back, and he would never apologize because he said he would do it again.
Right.
But wait a minute.
Well, it's not his money.
It's not his money anyway.
Yeah.
But let's look at something else. I understand that the company that controlled Solyndra was a bundler for our current administration, and that their representatives actually visited the White House about 14 times in the prior 3 weeks to the actual money that was issued.
Well, there is some allegations that there was a $75 million loan. I don't know if it's $72 or $75 million loan, and that loan was protected as in a very unusual maneuver.
Okay, well, isn't that the maneuver of reversing?
Right, usually when the government puts money into something as a loan or a guaranteed loan, the private investors get paid later. But there was a flip here where Chu said, okay, the government will get paid last, and these investors will come in and put in the 72 or 75, and they'll get paid first if stuff goes bust. But at that point, people are arguing it was already a downhill slide. I guess Chu is arguing, well, this was a last-ditch effort. We needed this money. We wouldn't be able to attract this investment, like the final resuscitation here, unless we did this special deal. But there's some question whether that's actually legal. I mean, the Congress.
Well, there is a law from 2004 that states very clearly that in the event the government puts forth any amount of money under, especially a stimulus package bill like this, that they must remain first in repayment line. And the problem was Secretary Chu, who claims he didn't really. He didn't see the problem with this. Yeah, he didn't see maybe he didn't remember there's a law that says you can't do this. But he actually did a deal where he restructured the debt so that the private companies could get their money back first.
But my understanding is that private company funding came in after the government put in money.
Well, yes, but see, that's what's odd. Because you're not supposed to have money come in and then have that go first in line. That's part of the problem here.
Yeah, and just like a corporate, the closely held people would get paid last. But anyway.
But what's odd about all this, Secretary Chu said he would do it all over again.
Well, that's true. But I mean, I think what Congress is what the point on this is saying, there's a charge that Solyndra delayed announcing layoffs, excuse me.
Payoffs and layoffs? Hey, this is Solyndra. You don't know what's going on.
Delayed announcing layoffs until after the election in 2010. So they were planning to lay off people, but runners came out from the administration and said, wait a minute, we need this PR event, right? Biden's going to come out here and everyone's got to be happy. And so you can't be laying off a bunch of people because you're kind of our poster child for this green technology and one thing or another.
But wait a minute, green technology. I'm all for the green, and the technology that gets away from the fossil fuels.
As long as it's a green corporate jet you're flying.
Yeah, as long as I'm driving in a jet that's propelled by wind power, then I'm a happy guy. But unfortunately, that's not quite what we have here. Here we have at least 5 other projects that look like they're falling in the same Solyndra pattern.
Right. And they're getting funded.
Funny enough, they're getting funded, and I understand a program in Nevada, which is going to be the largest solar farm. Miraculously enough, one of the board members is Nancy Pelosi's husband, funny enough. He's about 700 million. But the fact of the matter is these programs are untested. There is no city that's running on solar power.
Well, but that's because you're a capitalist pig. And
capitalist
you're always
pig?
looking at where the money goes and
where the money
taxpayer money.
goes.
And a lot of people would argue this money that's going to this green technology is a drop in the bucket to money that goes elsewhere, that goes to the Defense Department.
Oh, the Defense Department.
Yeah,
I've heard that story.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, and you've got to prime the pump somehow.
Oh, you got to prime the pump.
Yeah, and so, yeah, you may lose on these first companies, but it's only the capitalist pig, warmongering. Let's see, I've got some other stuff in here. The reactionaries. Reactionaries who wouldn't be happy with this taxpayer money getting funneled in this, and so a few of them flop.
Oh, I don't. Yeah, well, wait a minute. This is funny though. But anytime you have taxpayer money brought into something, you got to have more due diligence. And even private investment firms said Solyndra was a loss leader. There was no way that they were going to make money. The CBO looked at it and they said, don't do it. Even the Bush administration had looked at Solyndra early on and said, this is not worth being funded. So what you have here is you have a reason. Why was Solyndra really funded?
Well, there's a long march on the shining path to social justice that obviously you're not getting.
I'm not privy to.
You're not getting in step with. You're not getting in step with.
I got it.
It's a long march. There's a long march.
The long march to social justice?
Yeah, and so you don't necessarily, see your benefits right away.
I don't see my benefits right away.
So taxpayer money, it's going in supporting, green technology, and that's for a good cause and justifies the means. So they lose $1 billion here, $500 million here. There's no big deal.
Okay, well, let's talk about this a little bit. Secretary Chu, do you think he did something wrong?
Well, I think Secretary Chu showed a lot of guts taking responsibility for this.
Well, he took responsibility for it, but what does that mean?
Well, that means that he's probably covering for somebody,
What do you mean covering?
He's probably covering for somebody.
Wait a minute. Secretary Chu is a believer in green energy, so I
Right.
can't make any comment about that. He is a loyalist in that fashion.
Right.
But who would he be covering for?
Well, I'm just saying, he took ultimate responsibility. I mean, the buck stops here, but then most of his reasons for having things go the way they did is because he had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, but the buck didn't stop there. There's people above Secretary Chu.
But if he takes responsibility, that's where the buck stops.
Yeah, but no, taking responsibility is who was giving him the orders to do what he did.
He's claiming that it was all him and that he'd do it again.
He would do it again.
He would do it again.
Even in the
face of they lost all the money.
Even in the face of the loss of the money, or the potential loss of the money, even in the face that the solar energy panels that were being manufactured were inferior to other panels that are coming in from China.
Well,
I don't understand. I'm missing something here.
Well, the thing is, China has a state-supported economy, and so there's a question of currency manipulation, and some people say actually the Chinese are giving us foreign aid because they're actually reducing the price of their products by 20% by manipulating the currency. So some people say Chinese are doing us a big favor.
Doing us a favor? How are they doing us a favor?
Because they're selling us products cheaper than they're really worth because they're manipulating the currency.
Well, that's because they're manipulating their own currency.
Yeah, they're manipulating their own currency.
Yeah, but they're also help funding our country with debt.
But the only problem with that drives our manufacturers out of business.
Well, it does drive our manufacturers. And what happens when our manufacturers are out of business?
Then we start borrowing money from China.
Borrowing money from China?
Right.
Isn't that where we're borrowing money from now?
Yeah, that's where I think a good chunk of our expenditures, we're getting 30, 40 cents out of the dollar.
I don't
from
know.
China.
This sounds like it's all going back to global warming.
Well, that's the thing, Jim. That global warming was proved, and if you're going to object to that, it just means you're a flat earther.
Well, I'm not a flat earther, but I understand that there is a question about global warming.
What's that?
And I believe that it's all based on something that's not even reality.
And what's that?
Well, I mean, there's so much press out there today about why this whole global warming pattern has been a manipulation of certain scientists because they're receiving so much funding.